Hello, Night Seekers, and welcome to Lacuna Noir. This is where forgotten stories and gentle voices meet, carrying you softly into peaceful sleep, wrapped in mystery. Before tonight's stories begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let me know. And a little note before we begin. You may notice a few brief ads in the first 10 minutes, but after that, the rest of the video is completely ad-free. Just you, the silence, and the stories. So settle in, get comfortable, and let the night carry you. If you're drawn to these quiet, shadowed nights, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a story when darkness calls. When I was 3 years old, my family was going to pick up my grandparents for a Sunday drive. At that age, I did not understand time the way adults do, but I remember the day with a kind of strange clarity. I remember being in the back seat of the car on the passenger side. My little sister was there too. My grandfather was sitting in the front seat directly in front of me. Sunday drives were a normal thing in our family. It was just one of those small routines people had back then. You would get dressed, pile into the car, visit relatives, maybe stop somewhere for food or take the long way home. As a child, I probably did not care much about where we were going. I was just happy to be included and happy that Grandpa was there. I loved my grandfather. To me, he was one of those adults who felt steady and familiar. He had his own way of dressing, his own voice, his own habits, and his own place in the family. I remember him wearing a gray sweater and a peaked hat that day. Those details have never left me, even after all these years. He was sitting right in front of me. Then, something happened. Without warning, Grandpa suddenly keeled over. At 3 years old, I did not understand what I was seeing. I only knew that the adults changed immediately. Their voices changed. The calm feeling in the car disappeared. Everything became urgent and confusing. There were movements all around me, people speaking quickly, someone trying to help him, someone telling us what to do. I remember being removed from the car with my little sister and taken into my grandparents' store nearby. The adults were trying to protect us. I did not know that then. I only knew I had been taken away from the car while something serious was happening to Grandpa. The store was familiar enough that it should have felt safe, but it did not. The air felt strange. The adults looked frightened. People kept moving in and out. There was a kind of quiet panic around us, even if no one wanted to say too much in front of two small children. I remember standing there, confused and wanting to know where Grandpa was. At some point, I happened to look over my shoulder through the window. That was when I saw him. Grandpa was walking down the street. He was not alone. There were two men with him. Both of the men were wearing suits. That was the part that stood out to me even then. They looked formal and neat, dressed in dark suits like men going somewhere important. They did not look like anyone I recognized from the neighborhood. I had never seen them before. Grandpa was between them or close beside them, walking calmly down the street. And he was wearing the exact same clothes he had been wearing only moments earlier in the car. The same gray sweater, the same peaked hat. There was no mistaking it. It was him. I did not find it especially frightening at the time. I was 3. I had no reason to think seeing him outside was impossible. In my mind, Grandpa was walking down the street, so obviously he was fine. Maybe the adults were upset for some reason I did not understand. Maybe there had been an argument in the car. Maybe he had needed to leave. All I knew was that I had seen him. He looked normal. He looked calm. He was walking away with those two men in suits. So when the adults began saying that Grandpa had died, I could not accept it. How could he be dead? I had just seen him. I knew what dead meant, only in the vague way very young children understand it. I knew it meant somebody was not coming back. I knew it meant adults became sad. I knew it meant something terrible had happened. But I had just watched Grandpa walking down the street. Not someone who looked a little like him. Not a stranger in a gray sweater. Not a man wearing a similar hat. Grandpa, I remember being very certain about it. The adults tried to explain things to me, but I would not agree with them. I did not want to agree with them. I loved my grandfather, and I did not want him to be gone. But it was more than that. I truly believed they were wrong because I had seen him alive after they took me out of the car. I told people what I saw. I said Grandpa was walking down the street. I said there were two men with him. I said he was wearing his gray sweater and his hat. I probably said it over and over because nobody seemed to understand why I was so sure. Naturally, this did not go over well. The adults were grieving. They were shocked. They were trying to manage an emergency, protect the children, and deal with the sudden loss of someone they loved. They did not know what to do with a 3-year-old insisting that the man they were mourning was outside walking down the street. Some probably thought I was confused. Some may have thought I was trying to deny what had happened. Maybe some felt upset hearing me say it because they did not want to imagine him leaving while they were still trying to process the fact that he was gone. But I was not trying to upset anyone. I was not trying to make up a story. I did not understand why people kept telling me I was wrong. To me, the proof was simple. I had seen him. Later, our family doctor arrived to pronounce Grandpa dead. I remember this part because of the way my mother handled it. She knew I was struggling with what people were telling me. I had a very trusting relationship with our doctor. He was someone I knew well enough to believe. He was calm, kind, and familiar. My mother asked me whether I would take his word for it. She asked me, in a gentle way, whether I would believe the doctor if he said that Grandpa had died. I remember thinking about that. I did not want Grandpa to be dead. I did not want to stop believing what I had seen. But I trusted the doctor. He was an adult who had always been honest with me. He was not someone who would lie just to make me feel better or to make me stop asking questions. So I said that I would believe him. The doctor assured me that my grandfather had, in fact, died. That was the moment I accepted it. At least, I accepted that Grandpa's body had died. I accepted that he was not going to come back in the way he had been before. I accepted it because the doctor said it was true, and I trusted him. But the doctor did something else that I have never forgotten. He listened to me. He did not treat me like I was crazy. He did not laugh. He did not tell me I had imagined it and leave it at that. He listened respectfully while I told him what I had seen. I told him about Grandpa walking down the street. I told him about the two men in suits. I told him about the gray sweater and the peaked hat. I told him that it could not have been someone else because I knew exactly what Grandpa looked like. The doctor listened. Then he suggested that maybe the men in suits were angels. To a 3-year-old, that seemed completely reasonable. It solved the problem. Grandpa had died because the doctor said he had. But I had also seen Grandpa walking away because he had gone with angels. The two men in suits made sense that way. They had come for him. They had taken him somewhere. That explanation did not frighten me. It actually comforted me. It meant Grandpa had not simply disappeared. He had not been left alone. He had not been gone in the terrifying, empty way I first imagined when the adults said he was dead. He had been walking. He had been calm. He had been with two men who knew where they were going. As a child, that was enough. Problem solved. For years after that, I carried the image with me. I can still see it clearly. The street outside the store. The way I looked over my shoulder. Grandpa walking down the sidewalk. The two suited men beside him, his gray sweater, his peaked hat. There was nothing dramatic about the scene. No blinding light, no strange sound, no glowing figures, no sudden disappearance that I remember. He was simply walking. That is part of why the memory has stayed so strong. It felt ordinary. It was not like a dream where everything is distorted and unreal. It did not feel like something imaginary. It felt like seeing my grandfather walking down the street, exactly as I had seen him walk before. Only this time, he was walking away from us. As I grew older, I understood why my family tried to give me other explanations. They may have thought I saw a stranger who resembled him. They may have thought I confused someone else in a similar sweater and hat for Grandpa. They may have believed I created the memory later because I could not accept losing him. Those are reasonable explanations. Children can misunderstand things. Grief can shape memories. A 3-year-old can see someone from a distance and fill in details without realizing it. I understand that now. But I have never been able to make myself believe it was just another man. It was not only that he looked like Grandpa, it was that he looked exactly like him. He was wearing the exact clothes I had just seen him wearing in the car. The gray sweater, the same hat, the same familiar shape of him. I remember the certainty I felt, even though I was so young. That was Grandpa, and no matter what anyone told me later, that certainty never fully went away. I do not think my parents meant to dismiss me in a cruel way. They were hurting. They were trying to make sense of an impossible, painful day. They had lost someone suddenly. They were trying to protect 2 small children while dealing with their own shock. Maybe hearing me say that I saw him walking down the street made it even harder for them. Maybe they wanted to help me understand death in a practical way. Maybe they were afraid I would stay confused. Maybe they thought the most loving thing was to tell me it could not have been him. But I did not feel crazy because of the doctor. That one moment of kindness mattered. He did not insist that I had made it up. He did not tell me I was wrong in a harsh way. He gave me a way to hold both truths at once. Grandpa had died, and I had seen him go. That was enough for me. Even as an adult, I still return to that explanation sometimes. Not necessarily because I know angels were there. I cannot prove that. I cannot prove anything about what happens after death. I do not know whether the men in suits were angels, strangers, a memory, or something my childhood mind could not understand. But I do know what I remember. I remember seeing my grandfather walking down that street. He did not look scared. He did not look sick. He did not look like someone who had just suffered anything terrible. He looked peaceful. He looked like himself. And he was not alone. There is something comforting about that image, even after all these years. The adults around me saw tragedy. They saw a sudden medical emergency. They saw a loved one die in front of them. They saw grief, confusion, and a terrible day that changed the family. But I saw something else too. I saw Grandpa walking. I saw him leaving with 2 men who seemed to know where they were taking him. I was only 3 years old, and I had no reason to invent something so specific. I did not know enough about death, angels, or spiritual ideas to build some elaborate story around it. I only reported what I saw. Grandpa was walking down the street. 2 men in suits were with him. He was wearing the same gray sweater and peaked hat he had been wearing moments before. That is the memory. It has never changed. I still remember the feeling of confusion when people told me he was dead. I still remember not wanting to accept it. I still remember trusting the family doctor enough to accept what he said. But I also remember him listening to me. I remember the doctor saying, the men might have been angels. And I remember thinking that made sense. In a way, it still does. Because whenever I picture my grandfather now, I do not picture him in the car. I picture him walking down that street. He is wearing his gray sweater and his hat. He is calm. He is with two men in suits. And he is not alone. When I was about 15 years old, I saw something in my bedroom that I have never been able to explain. It happened in the early evening, at that strange time of day when the sun is low, but there is still plenty of light outside. The sky was probably clear, or clear enough for the sun to come through my bedroom window at the right angle. I remember the room being filled with that warm yellow light that only seems to happen near sunset. The window faced in a direction where the late afternoon sun could shine directly into the room. Most days, it just made the room look brighter for a little while. It threw long shadows across the floor, made dust visible in the air, and painted the wall above my bed with a soft golden color. That evening, though, the light looked different. I had gone upstairs for some reason. I do not remember whether I had been getting changed, looking for something, putting something away, or just wanting to be in my room. I only remember walking in and noticing the sunlight on the wall over my bed. At first, I thought it was just an unusual shadow. There were shapes in the reflected light. That was not completely strange. Shadows from window frames, trees, cars, signs, or objects outside can stretch into a room and make strange patterns. When sunlight comes in at a low angle, ordinary things can look distorted. Letters can become lines. Fences can become grids. A branch can look like an arm reaching across a wall. I knew all of that. Even at 15, I was not the kind of person who immediately assumed something supernatural was happening. I had always tried to look for logical explanations first. If I heard a noise, I assumed it was the house settling or a neighbor moving around. If I saw a shadow, I assumed it came from a car outside or a tree moving in the wind. So when I first saw the dark shapes in the yellow light, I did not panic. I just looked at them. Then I realized they were letters. They were not random lines or broken shapes. They looked like actual words, cast in shadow across the wall above my bed. The letters were dark against the warm light, clear enough that I could read them. For a second, I could not understand what I was seeing. Then I read the message. Execute Jennifer. I remember freezing. The words were not written on the wall with ink or paint. They were formed by the light and shadow itself. They looked like they had been projected there somehow, as though something outside was reflecting text into my bedroom. But the message made no sense. It was not a phrase I had seen anywhere before. It was not an advertisement slogan. It was not something from television. It was not a line from a song, a game, a book, or a poster I recognized. And more than that, I did not know anyone named Jennifer. That was the first thing that ran through my mind. Jennifer. Who was Jennifer? I had friends at school, family members, neighbors, classmates, teachers, and people I knew through other people. But nobody close to me was called Jennifer. I could not think of a Jennifer I had ever met. It was not even a name that had any strong connection to my life at the time. The word execute was worse. It was not a word people used casually in everyday conversation. It was not something you expected to see in a bedroom wall reflection. It sounded official, cold, and violent. It made the harmless evening light suddenly feel threatening. I stared at the message. For a moment, I wondered whether I was reading it wrong. Maybe the letters only looked like words. Human brains are good at finding patterns. We see faces in clouds, animals in stains, and familiar shapes in shadows. Maybe I was looking at a distorted reflection and forcing it into something meaningful. But I read it again. Execute Jennifer. The words were clear. I remember standing there, staring at the wall over my bed, while the yellow light filled the room. The message seemed so out of place that I did not know what to do. I was old enough to understand that it was probably some kind of reflection, but I was young enough that the words themselves scared me before I could reason through them. I did not want to stay alone in the room. So, I went to get my sister. I called for her and told her to come upstairs. I do not remember exactly what I said, but I know I tried to make her come quickly. I probably sounded nervous because she came to see what was wrong. I led her back toward my room. The whole time, I expected the words to still be there. I expected her to step inside, see the wall, and react the same way I had. Maybe she would immediately know where the reflection came from. Maybe she would tell me it was just something outside. Maybe we would both stare at it and figure out what was projecting it into the room. But when we got there, the message was gone. The yellow light was still on the wall. The room still had that warm evening glow, but the shadows had changed. There were no clear words anymore. No execute. No Jennifer. Nothing. I remember looking at the wall, then looking at my sister, then looking back at it again. I probably searched around the room as though the letters might be hidden somewhere else. But there was nothing. My sister did not know what to say. She did not really believe me. I cannot blame her for that. From her point of view, I had pulled her upstairs to show her a message that no longer existed. There was no proof. There was no photograph. There was no strange mark on the wall. There was no obvious object outside casting a shadow. There was only me saying I had seen words in the light. I told her exactly what I had read. Execute Jennifer. She looked confused. Then she asked who Jennifer was. I told her I did not know. That was true. I had no idea who Jennifer could have been. It was not a name connected to anyone in our family. It was not a friend. It was not somebody at school that I could think of. There was no Jennifer I was worried about. No Jennifer I had argued with. No Jennifer whose name had come up earlier that day. We agreed that it was probably for the best that I did not know anyone called Jennifer. That was the kind of thing you say when you are trying to laugh off something uncomfortable. We both laughed a little. Not because it was actually funny, but because the other option was to stand there taking it seriously. At 15, that is often how you deal with fear. You make a joke. You shrug. You act as though it is nothing. You tell yourself that shadows are just shadows, light is just light, and your brain probably made a mistake. But I could not stop thinking about it. The words had looked too clear. I had not seen a vague shape that vaguely resembled writing. I had seen a message. I had read it immediately. The letters had been arranged in 2 words, and they had made sense as a sentence, even if it was a disturbing sentence. Execute Jennifer. I spent a long time trying to work out how it could have happened. The most logical explanation I could come up with involved the bus shelter across the road. There was a bus shelter near our house with a large advertising panel. It had a reflective plexiglass surface behind it, the kind used to hold posters or advertisements. Depending on the time of day and the angle of the sun, the panel could catch light in strange ways. I started wondering whether some text from an advertisement had reflected onto my bedroom wall. That would explain a few things. The sun was low, which meant it could have bounced from one reflective surface to another. The bus shelter was in the right general direction. The ad space might have had letters or graphics that were distorted by the plexiglass. Maybe the sunlight hit the ad, bounced off the plastic, reflected through my window, and projected a warped version of the words onto the wall. In theory, that made sense. But I could never work out exactly how it would have created that message. I did not remember any advertisement that said anything remotely close to execute Jennifer. It was possible that the words were not really those words. Maybe the advert had contained unrelated text, and the reflection had distorted it enough that my mind read something sinister into it. For example, Maybe there had been a word like excite or exclusive or experience that became execute in the shadow. Maybe there had been a product name, a slogan, or a person's name that my brain turned into Jennifer. That possibility seemed reasonable. Brains do strange things with incomplete information. When we see half-formed letters, we often fill in what seems most likely. If the light and shadow were moving slightly, maybe my mind caught one possible combination of shapes for a split second and treated it like a complete message. Maybe the words had never truly been there. Maybe I had only thought they were there. But the problem was that I remember them too clearly. I remember the wall over my bed glowing yellow. I remember the letters being dark against the light. I remember the phrase. And I remember how immediate my reaction was. I did not stand there slowly trying to decode a strange pattern. I saw it and read it. The phrase landed in my mind all at once. It was so clear that I went straight to get my sister. If I had only seen something unclear, I do not think I would have bothered. I might have stared at it for a moment and dismissed it. But I was certain enough to leave the room and call someone else to come look. By the time we came back, it was gone. That made it impossible to prove. I could not recreate it. I tried watching the wall at the same time on other days, especially when the sun was low. I looked at the window, the angle of the light, and the road across from the house. I watched for other reflections. Sometimes there were shadows from things outside, but never anything that formed clear words. Nothing ever spelled anything again. There were no other messages, no strange names, no threatening phrases, no second appearance of Execute Jennifer. It happened once, and then never again. That should have made it easier to forget. One strange reflection in a bedroom is not enough to build an entire belief system around. I know that. There are countless ways light can behave unexpectedly. A reflection can look much clearer than it really is. The brain can make patterns out of random shapes. A bus shelter, a car windshield, a passing vehicle, a sign, or even the window itself might have created something unusual for a few seconds. But the fact that I never figured it out has stayed with me. I have always thought of myself as logical. I am not someone who looks for supernatural explanations. I do not enjoy believing that every strange thing is a ghost or a warning from another world. I do not think a weird shadow automatically means something paranormal happened. I want an explanation. I want to know what object made the reflection, what the original words were, and why the phrase appeared so clearly for such a short time. But I never found one. Sometimes I have wondered whether the phrase was simply a strange coincidence. Maybe there really was some text somewhere outside that included those letters in a different order. Maybe the reflection overlapped words from more than one surface. Maybe Execute was an accidental combination of multiple shadows, and Jennifer was another accidental shape that my brain joined together. The mind is capable of doing that. We see messages where there are none. We interpret random noise as words. We look at a shadow and recognize something familiar because we are programmed to find meaning in patterns. That explanation is probably the one I would give somebody else. If a friend told me they saw words in a reflection, I would probably ask about the light, the windows, nearby signs, and whether they had been tired or distracted. I would suggest reflections, pareidolia, and the strange way a low sun can stretch and combine objects into something that looks impossible. And yet, when I remember it happening to me, the logical explanation feels incomplete. Because I did not just see a face in a cloud. I did not just see a vague word in a stain. I saw a sentence, a disturbing sentence, and it appeared on the wall above my bed in the quiet yellow light of the early evening. The phrase itself was so oddly specific that it made the moment feel personal. even though it had nothing to do with me. I did not know Jennifer. I had never known Jennifer. There was no Jennifer in my family, friend group, school life, or neighborhood that I could connect to the message. There was no reason for the words to mean anything to me. Maybe that is why it unsettled me so much. If the words had said my own name, I might have been terrified. If they had said something completely random, I might have forgotten them. But Execute Jennifer sat in a strange middle space. It sounded serious and dangerous, yet it had no obvious connection to my life. It felt like something I had accidentally seen, like I had caught part of a message that was never meant for me. Of course, that is probably just my imagination adding meaning later. The more you think about an unexplained moment, the more mysterious it becomes. A few seconds of shadow can grow into a memory you examine from every possible angle for years. Still, there are moments from childhood that remain vivid because they never get resolved. This was one of mine. I can still picture my bedroom exactly as it was then. The bed beneath the wall, the low evening sun, the yellow light spreading across the room, the dark lettering inside that light. I can still remember the feeling of staring at the phrase and trying to decide whether I had actually read it correctly. Then I remember running to get my sister. I remember her standing there after the message vanished, unsure what to say. I remember us joking that it was lucky I did not know anyone named Jennifer, and I remember being left with no answer. Maybe it was an advert reflected from the bus shelter across the road. Maybe the plexiglass bent the light in a strange way. Maybe text from a poster became distorted as it bounced through my window. Maybe my brain took broken shadows and made them into something darker than they really were. Those are all possible explanations. In fact, they are probably the most likely explanations. But even now, I cannot say which one is right. I never found the original words. I never saw the reflection happen again. I never learned whether there was ever an advertisement at that bus shelter with a name or phrase that could have created what I saw. All I know is that, for a few seconds one evening when I was 15, sunlight formed a message on the wall above my bed. Then it disappeared before anyone else could see it. And no matter how hard I tried to explain it logically, I was never able to figure out where those words came from. When I was in college, I dated a guy whose mother had a very unusual mix of interests. During the day, she was a pharmacist. She had a normal job, a normal schedule, and the kind of professional life that made her seem practical and grounded. But outside of work, she was deeply interested in things like stones, crystals, tarot cards, energy, and spiritual practices. She had shelves with crystals in different colors and shapes. Some were small enough to fit in the palm of your hand, while others were larger pieces displayed around the condo like decorations. There were tarot decks in drawers and on tables. There were little bowls, candles, stones, and objects I did not fully understand, but assumed were meaningful to her. At the time, I did not think much of it. I was not especially into any of those things myself, but I also did not judge her for it. Everyone has interests. Some people collect records, some people garden, some people are obsessed with sports, and some people believe certain stones hold energy. Her spiritual side seemed harmless. It was just part of who she was. My boyfriend lived about 20 minutes away from our college campus, and we would often go to visit his mother on weekends. Sometimes we would stop by for dinner. Sometimes we would stay overnight. Sometimes we would just go there because it was more comfortable than being stuck around campus all the time. The condo had once been his home, so he knew every room and every little detail about it. His old bedroom was still there, and when we stayed over, that was where we slept. It was familiar to him in the way childhood bedrooms are familiar, even after you move out. Old furniture, Old books, little reminders of being younger, and a layout he could probably walk through in the dark. For me, the place eventually began to feel comfortable, too. It was not my home, obviously, but it became something close to a home, away from home. There was always food. His mother was kind to me. The condo was cozy during the day. The rooms had a lived-in warmth, and there was something calming about being away from college life for a night or two. College can make everything feel temporary. Dorms, apartments, classes, work shifts, deadlines, parties, late nights, and people constantly coming in and out of your life. Going to his mother's place felt different. It felt settled. There was a sense of routine there. We would watch television, eat something, talk with his mom, then eventually go to sleep in his old room. Nothing about the place had ever made me feel unsafe. Not until that night. It started like any other visit. We had gone over to the condo in the evening. His mom was there, and everything felt normal. I do not remember exactly what we watched, but we spent part of the night in front of the television, like we usually did. We talked, relaxed, and did all the ordinary things couples did when they were spending the night together. Eventually, we went to bed in his old room. I remember feeling tired and comfortable. There was no reason for me to feel nervous. We had stayed there before. I knew the house. I knew where the bathroom was. I knew the hallway. I knew his mother was sleeping somewhere else in the condo. It was supposed to be a normal night. At some point in the middle of the night, I woke up because I had to use the bathroom. The room was dark. There was that quiet, heavy stillness that houses have late at night, when everyone is asleep and even small sounds feel louder than usual. I could hear the low hum of something electrical in the distance. Maybe the refrigerator. Maybe the heating system. Maybe just the building itself making normal nighttime sounds. My boyfriend was asleep beside me. I tried to move quietly so I would not wake him. I got out of bed, found my way to the bedroom door, and stepped into the hallway. The hallway was almost completely black. There were no lights on, no television glow from another room, no light coming in through a window. It was dark enough that I had to let my eyes adjust before I could clearly see the floor and walls. I had walked through that hallway many times during the day. I knew which way the bathroom was. I knew the room doors. I knew where the hall opened into the living area. Nothing about it should have been unfamiliar. But that night, the hallway felt different. I took only a few steps before I saw someone standing in the middle of it. At first, my mind did not understand what I was looking at. There was a woman in the hallway. She was dressed in red. She had long blonde hair. And she was glowing. Not glowing in the way a person looks under a lamp. Not glowing because there was light behind her. The entire hallway was pitch black, but she looked bright, almost sunlit. It was as though a warm light was falling directly on her, while the rest of the condo remained swallowed in darkness. The red of her clothing stood out clearly. Her hair looked pale and long against the darkness. But her face was wrong. Or maybe it was not there at all. I could not make out distinct features. I could not remember eyes, a nose, a mouth, or any expression. It was like she had a face, but my mind could not hold on to it. Like looking at something through bright glare, where the shape is there, but all the details vanish. I remember staring at her for a second that felt much longer. I could see her body. I could see the red clothing. I could see the long blonde hair. But where her face should have been, there was nothing I could properly describe. No expression. No clear identity. No human detail. She was simply standing there in the hallway, bright and silent. I froze. I did not scream at first. Fear does strange things to you. Sometimes you panic loudly. Sometimes you run. But sometimes your body stops responding because your brain cannot decide what it is seeing. I remember feeling as though all the air had left my lungs. My first thought was that it had to be his mother. Maybe she had gotten up during the night. Maybe she was wearing something red. Maybe the dark hallway was making her look strange. Maybe I had just woken up and my eyes had not adjusted yet. But I knew it was not her. His mother did not have long blonde hair, and even if she had been standing there, she would have looked like a person. She would have had a face. She would have been lit by something. She would have moved, spoken, or reacted when she saw me. This woman did not. She just stood there. The glowing brightness around her made no sense. It was like she was standing in sunlight at noon, but it was the middle of the night and the hallway had no windows nearby. There was no lamp on behind her. There was no open door spilling light into the hall. No television was playing. No streetlight could have reached that spot. The light seemed to belong to her. That realization was the moment I panicked. I did not go to the bathroom. I did not try to walk past her. I turned around and ran back into the bedroom. I shut the door behind me, climbed back onto the bed, and shook my boyfriend awake as hard as I could. He woke up startled. At first, he looked angry and confused, the way someone does when they are pulled out of deep sleep. He asked what was wrong. I tried to speak, but I was shaking so badly that it took me a moment to get the words out. Before I could explain what I had seen, he said something that made my fear turn into something much worse. He told me he had just had a nightmare. I asked him what it was about. He looked disturbed, not fully awake, but disturbed enough that I could tell the dream had been vivid. He said he had dreamed about a woman being chased by men. That alone would have been unsettling. But then he described the woman. She was wearing red. She had long, blonde hair. He described her exactly the way I had just seen her in the hallway. A woman in red. Long, blonde hair. No face I could remember. Bright in the darkness. I remember staring at him as he spoke. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then I told him what I had seen. I told him I had gone into the hallway to use the bathroom. I told him there was a woman standing there. I told him she was dressed in red, with long blonde hair. I told him she was glowing even though the hallway was black. His face changed completely. He stopped looking sleepy. He looked terrified. We both started shaking. It was not the kind of fear where you can laugh it off right away. It was not the kind of fear where one person tells the other they are imagining things and then everyone goes back to bed. We were both awake now. Completely awake. We kept comparing what we had seen and dreamed. He had not seen the woman while he was awake, but he had dreamed of a woman being chased by men. He had seen her in red. He had seen the long blonde hair. He had woken up with the image, still in his mind. I had not dreamed anything. I had stepped into the hallway and seen a woman who looked exactly like the woman in his nightmare. The timing was what made it impossible to dismiss. I woke him immediately after seeing her. He woke up in the middle of the nightmare. We were both frightened at the same moment, each with a version of the same woman in our minds. We sat there in the bedroom for a long time. Neither of us wanted to open the door. Neither of us wanted to go out into the hall. The bathroom suddenly felt very far away. We stayed in bed with the light on, listening to every tiny sound in the condo. Every creak of the building made us tense. Every shift in the air conditioner or refrigerator made us stop talking. We kept expecting to hear footsteps outside the bedroom door. We did not. The woman never spoke. She did not knock. She did not appear again. But that did not make us feel better. The absence of any further sound somehow made the whole thing worse. The condo was too quiet. It felt as though something had happened, and we were now waiting for it to happen again. At some point, we talked about whether we should wake his mother. We considered knocking on her bedroom door and asking whether she had been walking around. Maybe she had heard something. Maybe she had seen something. Maybe there was a logical explanation that would make everything normal again. But we did not do it. I do not know whether we were too scared, too embarrassed, or too unsure of what to say. What were we supposed to tell her? Sorry to wake you, but I saw a glowing, faceless woman in the hallway, and your son dreamed about her at the same time. It sounded ridiculous, even though it had just happened. So we stayed in the room. We did not sleep for the rest of the night. We tried. At some point, we turned the light off because we were exhausted. But then, one of us would hear a small noise and turn it back on. We talked in whispers. We sat up. We lay down. We checked the time over and over. The hours moved painfully slowly. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the woman in the hallway. The red clothing, the blonde hair, the bright glow around her. The blank place where a face should have been. I kept wondering whether she had been looking at me. I could not remember eyes, but I still felt watched. My boyfriend kept replaying the nightmare. He said the woman had been running or trying to get away from men. He could not remember every detail, but he remembered the feeling of fear in the dream. He remembered that she was being chased. He remembered the red. He remembered the hair. We tried to figure out whether one of us had somehow influenced the other. Maybe he had made a noise in his sleep that woke me. Maybe I had heard it and dreamed something while I was half awake. Maybe I saw a shadow in the hallway and turned it into a woman because I was groggy. Maybe I heard him talking in his sleep about a woman, and my brain created the image without me realizing it. Those were the explanations we tried to hold on to. But none of them felt right. I had not heard him say anything before I saw her. I had not been half asleep when I stepped into the hallway. I had woken up because I needed to use the bathroom. I was awake enough to walk out of the room and recognize the hallway. And the image was too clear. It was not a shadow that looked vaguely human. It was a woman in red, long blonde hair, bright, glowing light in total darkness. The next morning, the condo looked normal again. Sunlight came through the windows. The rooms were familiar. The kitchen was warm. The hallway looked like an ordinary hallway. There was no strange glow, no woman, no evidence that anything unusual had happened. His mother was awake and doing normal things. That almost made the night feel unreal. She acted exactly as she always had. She made coffee, moved around the condo, talked to us, and asked normal questions. Her crystals and tarot cards were still around the place, but they did not seem more sinister in daylight. They were just objects on shelves and tables again. Still, I could not relax. The condo no longer felt like a home away from home. It felt like a place where something had stood in the hallway while everyone slept. I kept looking toward that section of the condo whenever I had to walk past it. During the day, it seemed ridiculous to be scared. There was nothing there. It was just walls, doors, carpet, and ordinary furniture. But at night, I had seen someone. And my boyfriend had dreamed about her at the exact same time. I never found out whether there had been any history connected to the condo. I do not know whether someone had once lived there who wore red and had long blonde hair. I do not know whether anyone had been hurt there. I do not know whether his mother had ever experienced anything strange in the house before. We did not ask. Part of me wondered about the tarot cards, crystals, and spiritual things his mother kept around. I wondered whether she had tried to contact something. I wondered whether she had performed any rituals or readings that had opened some kind of door. But I also know how unfair that thought might be. Being interested in crystals and tarot cards does not mean someone is summoning spirits. It does not mean a person has invited something dark into their home. She may have simply enjoyed those things as part of her beliefs. She had always been kind to me. She had never acted threatening or strange. I do not know if her interests had anything to do with what happened. Maybe it had nothing to do with her at all. Maybe I saw something in the hallway because I was exhausted, disoriented, or briefly caught between sleep and waking. Maybe my boyfriend had a nightmare because he was sleeping in his childhood room. Maybe our minds connected the two experiences afterward because we were frightened. That is possible. But I cannot forget how specific it was. The woman I saw matched the woman he dreamed about. Not generally, not just a woman. A woman in red, with long blonde hair. And neither of us had talked about her before that moment. After that night, I did not want to go back. I did not make some big dramatic announcement. I did not accuse his mother of anything. I did not tell everyone there was a ghost in her condo. I just stopped feeling comfortable there. The next time my boyfriend suggested going to visit, I made excuses. I said I had homework. I said I was tired. I said I had plans. Anything that would keep me from having to sleep in that old room again. The idea of waking up in the middle of the night and walking into that hallway made my stomach tighten. I could not imagine seeing her again. Eventually, I never went back at all. Not long after that, my boyfriend and I broke up. The breakup was not entirely because of the experience. Relationships in college end for all kinds of reasons. People change. Schedules change. You realize you want different things. You grow apart. It happens. But I will admit that the night in his mother's condo stayed in the back of my mind. It changed the way I felt about the place. Before, it had been comforting. Afterward, it felt wrong. Not necessarily evil. Not necessarily haunted. Just wrong in a way I could not explain. There are experiences that make you question what you think you know. You can be logical, skeptical, and willing to consider normal explanations, but then something happens that does not fit neatly into any category. That night was like that for me. Maybe I saw a dreamlike image while half awake. Maybe he had a nightmare that happened to match what I thought I saw. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe there was some explanation involving shadows, sleep, stress, and the way the brain processes fear. But I know how I felt when I stood in that hallway. I know it was dark. I know there was no light source. And I know I saw a glowing woman in red with long blonde hair and no face that I could remember. Then I ran into the bedroom and woke my boyfriend, only to hear him describe the same woman from his nightmare. We never slept that night, and I never saw that condo as home again. Sorry to pause for just a moment. If this is your first time here, welcome. I hope you're enjoying the calm so far. If you'd like more nights like this, true stories, gentle rain, no interruptions, please subscribe to Lacuna Noir. It really helps me keep creating these peaceful experiences for you. And tap the bell so you're here every time a new story arrives in the dark. Now, back to the story. I went to a non-religious high school in the UK, which is important because there was absolutely no reason for a nun to be walking around the building. It was an ordinary school. No chapel, no nuns teaching classes, no religious uniforms, no church attached to the grounds. It was the kind of place with gray corridors, classroom doors with little wired glass windows, crowded stairwells, flickering fluorescent lights, and teachers constantly telling students to stop running. I was always one of those quiet, nerdy kids who got on well with teachers. I did my work. I did not cause much trouble. I was not exactly popular, but I was useful. Teachers knew I would actually take a note to another classroom instead of throwing it away or using it as an excuse to wander around with my friends. If someone in class felt sick, I was often asked to take them to the nurse. If a teacher needed paperwork delivered to the office, another set of worksheets copied, or a message taken to a classroom on the other side of the building. I was the one they would send. At the time, I liked being trusted. It gave me little breaks from lessons, and it made me feel more grown up than the other students. While everyone else was stuck in maths or English, I got to walk through the school when the corridors were quiet. I knew which teachers were friendly, which offices had the best biscuits, and which routes let you avoid the busiest staircases. Most of the time, those little jobs were boring. You walked down a hallway carrying a pile of papers, knocked on a door, handed them over, and went back to class. Sometimes you waited outside the nurse's office while a sick kid sat inside. Sometimes you passed cleaners pushing carts or teachers hurrying between meetings. Usually, though, the school felt strangely empty during lessons. That was when I started seeing the nun. The first time, I was walking through one of the older corridors with papers for a teacher in another department. It was probably late morning or early afternoon, during class time, because there was no one else around. I remember the corridor being quiet in that familiar school way, with only the hum of lights and the distant sound of a class somewhere behind a closed door. I saw someone walking at the far end of the hallway. At first, I did not think anything of it. I assumed it was a teacher. But as I got closer, I realized the person was wearing what looked exactly like a nun's habit. A black dress or robe, dark fabric hanging almost to the floor, with a white section around the head and face. It was unmistakable. Not a long coat. Not a teacher in black clothes. Not someone wearing a scarf. A nun. She was walking away from me at first, moving down the hall with her head slightly lowered. Her pace was calm, not hurried. She did not look around. She did not seem lost. She walked as if she belonged there. I remember slowing down. The whole thing was so out of place that my mind did not immediately become frightened. I was mostly confused. I knew we did not have nuns at school. It was not a religious school. There had never been a nun at any assembly, school event, or parents' evening. Nobody wore anything remotely like that. Still, there she was. I watched her reach the end of the corridor and turn a corner. I did not run after her. I did not call out. I just stood there for a moment with the papers in my hands, trying to work out what I had seen. Then I went on with my errand. When I got back to class, I told my mates. I said I had just seen a nun walking around the school. They laughed immediately. Not in a cruel way at first, more like they thought I was trying to make a joke. Someone asked whether I had hit my head. Someone else asked whether I had been sent to religious education by mistake. Another friend said I was obviously taking the piss because there were no nuns at our school. I insisted that I was serious. That only made them laugh harder. The more I tried to explain it, the more ridiculous it sounded. I was standing there telling a classroom full of teenagers that I had been delivering papers and had seen a nun walking through an empty corridor. Of course, nobody believed me. I eventually gave up. I told myself it had probably been a teacher in some unusual outfit. Maybe she had been visiting. Maybe she was connected to a student. Maybe there was some meeting going on that I did not know about. But I kept thinking about it. The woman had not looked like she was visiting a school. She had not been carrying a bag or paperwork. She had not been standing at reception. She had been alone in a quiet corridor during lesson time, walking with the calm confidence of somebody who had done it many times before. A few days later, I saw her again. This time, I was taking something to the office. I had come down one of the stairwells and was walking across the ground floor corridor when I noticed movement farther ahead. The building was almost empty again, apart from distant voices behind classroom doors. There she was, the same black and white figure, the same dark clothing, the same covered head. She was walking past a row of classroom doors toward the science block. I stopped. For a second, I thought maybe I had been right the first time. Maybe there really was a nun working in the school for some reason. Maybe she was a visitor who had been there more than once. Maybe she had some job I did not understand. But then I remembered that nobody else seemed to know about her. I watched her for a few seconds, then she turned down another corridor and disappeared. When I got back to class, I told my friends again. This time, they were ready for it. The joke had already started. Oh, was your nun there again? Did she give you homework? Did she tell you to pray for better grades? Maybe she's the head teacher's secret boss. Everyone thought it was hilarious. I tried asking a few teachers, too. At first, I did it casually. I asked one teacher whether there was a nun working at the school or visiting for something. I expected them to say there was some explanation I did not know. Instead, they laughed. One teacher looked at me and said something like, "We don't have nuns here." Another asked if I had been watching too many horror films. A different teacher told me, with a smile, that I should get back to class and stop making things up. Nobody took it seriously. That was frustrating because I had not been making it up. I was not trying to become known as the weird kid who saw ghosts. I did not want attention. In fact, the attention was the worst part. Every time I mentioned it, the story got bigger and more embarrassing. Soon, people in my class knew about the nun. It became one of those jokes that follows you around for far too long. Someone would see me walking down the hall and say, "Watch out, she's after you." Someone would ask whether I had seen the nun that day. If I got sent out with papers, people would laugh and ask whether I was going to visit her. Even teachers who had heard about it would smile when I came back into class. I started keeping quiet about the sightings because I did keep seeing her. For about a month, maybe a little longer, I would catch sight of the nun in different parts of the school, always when the halls were unusually empty. Always when I was out of class on some little errand. Sometimes I saw her at the far end of a corridor. Sometimes she was crossing a stairwell landing. Once, I thought I saw her standing near the entrance to an older part of the building, though she disappeared before I could get close enough to see her properly. She never spoke to me. She never looked directly at me for long. In fact, I cannot remember her face clearly at all. I remember the shape of her. I remember the black habit and the white around her head. I remember the way she moved. But whenever I tried to picture her face, there was nothing useful there. It was as if she was always seen from too far away, or always slightly turned aside. That bothered me. If she had been a real person, surely I should have been able to describe her better. I should have known whether she was young or old. I should have noticed what color her eyes were, what kind of shoes she wore, whether she carried anything. But I could not. All I remembered was a nun walking through a school where no nuns should have been. One day I saw her when I was with friends. That should have solved everything. At least, I thought it would. I was walking with a few mates between lessons. The corridor was busier than usual, though not packed. We were talking about something stupid, probably homework or a teacher we did not like. I remember feeling relieved to be with other people because I had started hating walking through the school alone. Then I saw her ahead of us. She was at the far end of the hallway, walking toward a corner. The black and white stood out clearly against the dull school walls. I stopped talking. I pointed. "There," I said. "That's her. That's the nun." My friends looked in the direction I pointed, but she had already turned the corner. I ran after her. My friends followed, partly because they were curious, and partly because they thought I was still joking. We reached the corner seconds later. There was nobody there. The corridor beyond was empty. No open doors, no stairwell door closing, no person moving away. Nothing. I remember standing there, looking down the hall, feeling angry rather than scared. My friend had missed her by seconds. He had looked up too late. He saw the back of something dark disappear around the corner. Or at least he admitted later that he thought he might have. But when we ran after her, there was no one. That made the joke worse. My friends did not believe me. They thought I had seen a teacher in a black coat, then got carried away. One said I had probably mistaken a parent or visitor for a nun. Another said maybe I was trying to mess with them. But I had seen her clearly. And for once, I had not been alone when I saw her. I was furious. I kept telling them that she had been right there. I had pointed at her. They had nearly seen her. We had run after her immediately. Still, nobody believed me. It became one of those humiliating things that sticks in your mind because you know you are telling the truth, but everyone around you has decided it is funny. Eventually, a girl in the school said she had seen the nun too. I do not remember exactly how the conversation came up. Maybe she overheard someone making a joke. Maybe somebody mentioned me seeing nuns again. But she said, quietly at first, that she had seen a woman in a nun's outfit walking in one of the empty corridors. For a moment, I thought that would finally change things. I thought people would stop laughing. I thought the teachers might admit there was some strange visitor or staff member nobody had told us about. But it did not really help. People either thought she was joining in with the joke, or they assumed she had heard my story and was playing along. Some people laughed at both of us. Others said she probably saw the same teacher in a black coat I had supposedly mistaken for a nun. It never became proof. Nothing ever became proof. There were no pictures, no CCTV footage that anyone showed us, no staff announcement explaining that a nun had been visiting, no former student coming forward years later and saying there had once been religious staff in the building. Just my memory. And one other girl saying she had seen her too. Eventually, I stopped talking about it. I learned that people will keep laughing as long as they think you are giving them something to laugh at. So I stopped correcting them. When someone asked whether I had seen the nun lately, I would shrug. If somebody made a joke, I would laugh along even though it annoyed me. But I never stopped looking for her. Every time I was sent out of class, I became aware of the empty corridors. I would listen for footsteps. I would glance down stairwells. I would look around corners before I turned them. Sometimes I would catch myself expecting to see that black and white shape at the end of a hallway. And sometimes I did. Then she would disappear before anyone else could see her. I never found out who she was. Maybe there was a simple explanation. Maybe there was a religious woman visiting the school for some reason. Maybe she was a parent, a counselor, a volunteer, or someone connected with a student. Maybe the teachers I asked genuinely did not know about her. Maybe she wore something that only looked like a habit. Maybe I saw the same visitors several times and gave the whole thing a more dramatic meaning because I was a teenager and everyone around me kept making jokes. That is possible. I know memory is not perfect. I know the mind can turn something strange into something stranger, especially after people start laughing about it. Maybe I became more alert to dark clothing in the halls. Maybe every black coat started looking like the nun I had first seen. But I do not think that is what happened. The woman looked too specific. The white head covering was too clear, and the way she vanished around corners was too strange. The school was not huge. There were places where someone could turn away quickly, of course, but when we ran after her with my friends, there was nowhere she could have gone. We should have heard a door close. We should have seen someone on the stairs. We should have caught at least a glimpse of her moving away. Instead, there was just an empty corridor. Over 10 years have passed now, and I am still bitter about it. Not necessarily because I think there was definitely a ghost nun haunting my old school. I cannot prove that. Maybe there is some stupid, ordinary explanation that I have never heard. But I am bitter because no one believed me. I was not trying to tell a scary story. I was not asking people to make me mysterious or interesting. I was just a nerdy kid doing errands for teachers, walking through empty school corridors and seeing someone who should not have been there. Then everybody turned it into a joke. Even after another girl said she had seen her, it did not matter. People still laughed. Teachers still shrugged it off. My friends still joked about it. And I was left with the same memory over and over again. A nun walking through the halls of a non-religious school, always appearing when nobody else was around, always disappearing before anyone could catch her. So yes, more than a decade later, I am still annoyed. Because whether she was a ghost, a visitor, a trick of the light, or some teacher in an unusually dramatic coat, I saw her more than once. And fuck that nun. When I was a kid, I spent a lot of time at my grandparents' house. They had owned that house for as long as my mum had been alive, and possibly even longer than that. It had always been part of the family. It was the house where holidays happened, where people gathered for meals, where old family things stayed in the same drawers for years, and where every room seemed to hold some memory from before I was even born. Nobody in the family seemed to know much about the actual history of the property. They knew the house had been there for a long time. They knew my mum had grown up there. They knew previous generations had probably lived nearby. But nobody had ever found a clear story about who had built it, what had happened there before my family, or whether anyone else had ever lived in the house before it became my grandparents' home. As a child, I did not think that mattered. It was just Grandma and Grandpa's house. It was familiar. It smelled like their furniture, their cooking, old carpets, and whatever laundry soap my grandmother used. It had its own sounds, too. The floorboards creaked in certain places. Pipes clicked when someone used the bathroom. Doors made little noises when the temperature changed. At night, the house settled in a way that made it feel as though it was breathing. During the day, none of that bothered me. I loved staying there. Whenever I spent the night, I usually slept in my mum's old childhood bedroom. Everyone called it the Purple Room. The name was simple, but it fit perfectly. It had purple carpet and lavender wallpaper, the kind of room that looked bright and cheerful during the day, but became strangely dark after sunset. The room was large for a child's bedroom. There was a queen-sized bed positioned near the middle, which seemed huge to me when I was little. Next to the bed was an enormous window, much larger than the windows in my own room at home. During the daytime, it made the room feel open and full of light. You could look out at the yard, the trees, the darkening sky, and whatever weather was passing through. In summer, I stayed at my grandparents' house a lot. It was one of those places where time moved differently. There were long afternoons, family meals, old films on television, and hours where adults talked while children found their own ways to stay occupied. I spent a lot of time in the Purple Room. I would lie on the bed, play with toys, read, watch the light move across the carpet, or stare out of that huge window. At night, I liked the room less. The lavender wallpaper looked duller in the dark. The purple carpet seemed almost black. The large window became a flat rectangle of darkness. Even with curtains, I always knew it was there beside the bed. Still, I was young, and I did not think of the room as haunted or dangerous. It was just where I slept. The night that changed everything happened during one of those summer stays. I was probably 6 or 7 years old. I remember waking up suddenly in the middle of the night. It must have been around 1 or 2 in the morning, because the whole house was silent. There was no television downstairs, no voices from the kitchen, no sound of adults moving around. The kind of silence that only happens when everyone else is deeply asleep. At first, I did not know why I had woken up. I was lying in the bed facing the large window. The room was dark, but there was enough faint light from outside that I could see the outline of the window, the shape of the curtains, and parts of the room around me. Then I saw movement outside. For a second, I thought it was a tree branch moving in the wind, but it was not. There was a puppet show outside my window. Even now, writing that makes me feel ridiculous, because it sounds impossible. It sounds like something a child would imagine after a dream. But I remember it too clearly. I could see shadows moving across the outside of the window. They looked like hand puppets or sock puppets, the kind where someone puts their hand inside and makes a little character move. The shadows popped up and moved around as though they were acting out some kind of small performance. It looked like 1 or 2 people were making them. There were shapes that seemed to talk to each other, bobbing up and down. One shape disappeared while another appeared. The movements were jerky and playful, exactly like someone using their hands to perform behind a screen. But there was no screen. There was only my window. And outside that window was darkness. I did not understand where the shadows could possibly be coming from. I lay there, staring at them for a few seconds, trying to make sense of it. My first thought was that I was not fully awake. Maybe I had woken up in the middle of a dream. Maybe my eyes were adjusting to the darkness. Maybe something outside was casting shadows in a way that made them look like puppets. That was the only explanation I could come up with. I told myself I was tired. I told myself I was imagining it. I decided to ignore it. That was the mistake I still think about. I turned away from the window and rolled onto my right side. That was when I saw the figure standing in the doorway. The hallway outside the purple room was completely dark. There was no lamp on, no light from another room, no glow from downstairs. It was pitch black. But I could see the figure clearly. It was large. It stood in the doorway without moving. At first, I did not understand what it was. It was darker than the darkness around it, like a solid black shape blocking the entrance. I could not see a face. I could not see clothes. I could not see hands clearly. It was only a tall, black figure standing at the edge of the room. My stomach dropped. That feeling came before I even had time to think. My body knew something was wrong before my mind could explain it. My heart started beating hard and fast. I remember feeling suddenly awake in a way I had not been a moment earlier. There was no more possibility that I was dreaming. I could feel the bed under me. I could feel the blanket against my skin. I could hear my own breathing. I could see the doorway. And I could see that thing standing in it. I blinked. It was closer. At first, I wondered whether I had imagined that. Maybe my eyes had shifted. Maybe the darkness was playing tricks on me. Maybe the figure had always been in the same place, and I had only thought it had moved because I was scared. So I blinked again. It was closer. I remember trying not to blink after that. I kept my eyes open as wide as I could, staring at the black shape. But my eyes were watering from fear. I could not stop myself from blinking. Every time I blinked, it seemed to move nearer. Not quickly, not like something running toward the bed. It came closer in small, impossible jumps. One moment it was in the doorway. Then it was just inside the room. Then it was farther past the threshold. It did not make a sound. There were no footsteps, no creak in the floorboards, no rustle of clothes. It simply appeared closer each time my eyes shut for a fraction of a second. I remember feeling as though my heart had stopped. The room grew colder, not just cool because it was nighttime, cold enough that I felt it in my chest, cold enough that I remember seeing my breath in front of me, even though it was summer and I was under a blanket in a bedroom. The air seemed to change. It felt heavy and frozen. The figure got closer. By the time it was within arm's reach of the bed, I could not move. I was completely terrified. I had never felt fear like that before. Not the fear of a bad dream, not the fear of a scary film or a strange noise in the dark. This felt physical. My body had gone cold. My hands would not work properly. I could not think of anything except that something was standing beside me. I still could not see its face. I do not know whether it had one. I could only see the outline of something tall and black beside the bed. For a few seconds, I could not make a sound. Then somehow, I screamed. It was not a quiet cry or a frightened call from my grandparents. It was the kind of scream that comes from somewhere deep in your body when you are too scared to control it. The scream woke everyone. My grandparents woke up. My brother woke up. I heard doors opening, footsteps in the hall, voices calling my name. The house that had been completely silent a moment before suddenly filled with movement. My grandmother got to my room first. I remember hearing her coming down the hallway, then seeing her reach the doorway. She flicked the light on immediately. The figure was gone. There was nothing beside the bed, nothing in the doorway, nothing in the hall. The room looked exactly as it always did. Purple carpet, lavender wallpaper, the queen-sized bed, the huge window, ordinary furniture. Nothing strange. But I was sobbing. I could barely speak properly. I kept trying to tell my grandmother what I had seen. I told her there had been a black figure in the doorway. I told her it came closer every time I blinked. I told her there had been puppet shadows outside the window. I tried to explain how cold the room had become, but I was young, scared, and crying so hard that I probably did not make much sense. My grandmother sat beside me and stroked my hair. She told me I had just had a bad dream. She said I was safe. She said nothing was there. She said the shadows outside the window were probably trees or lights or something my imagination had turned into a scary dream. She tried to calm me down the way grandparents do. But I did not believe her. I knew what I had seen. I knew I had been awake. I knew I had looked at the puppet show first and tried to ignore it. I knew I had turned toward the door. I knew the figure had been standing there. I knew it had moved closer. It did not feel like a dream. It felt more real than most of my memories from that age. My grandparents checked the room. They looked around the hall. They checked the window. They probably made sure the doors were locked. There was nothing. Eventually, they got me calm enough to lie back down. I do not remember whether I slept in that room for the rest of the night. I may have been taken to another room, or I may have stayed close to my grandparents. But I do remember being afraid of the purple room after that. The huge window stopped feeling like a normal window. At night, I wondered whether I would see the puppet shadows again. I wondered whether the figure would come back. I wondered whether it was hiding in the hallway whenever the lights were off. For a long time, I did not tell many people the full story because no one believed me. They treated it as a childhood nightmare. Adults often do that. They do not mean to be cruel. They want to comfort you. They want to make you feel safe. They assume children dream vivid things, wake up confused, and turn shadows into monsters. Maybe they were trying to protect me from being scared. But every time someone said it was only a dream, it made me feel more alone. Because I was not asking them to believe in ghosts. I was asking them to believe that I had been awake. I was asking them to understand how real it had felt. As I got older, I tried to think about it logically. Maybe the puppet show really was a shadow from trees, cars, or people outside. Maybe there had been something moving in the yard that created shapes across the window. Maybe I was half asleep and my brain interpreted random movements as sock puppets. Maybe the black figure was sleep paralysis. I have read about sleep paralysis since then. I know people can wake up and see shadows, figures, or shapes in their rooms while they are unable to move. I know people can feel a presence in the doorway or beside the bed. I know they can feel cold, pressure, fear, and the sense that something is getting closer. That explanation makes sense in some ways. I was young. It was the middle of the night. I had just woken up. I was lying in bed. I felt unable to move. I saw a dark figure in the doorway. Maybe my body was still partly asleep while my mind was awake. But there are details that still do not fit for me. The puppet show came first. I remember being awake enough to watch it and decide to turn away from the window. I remember choosing to ignore it. Then I saw the figure. The sequence feels too clear to be one confused dream, and the cold felt real. I still remember the way the room seemed to freeze. I remember feeling my breath in the air. I remember the cold crawling over my body as the figure came closer. Maybe fear made it feel colder than it was. Maybe I was under a thin blanket and the room had been cold all along. Maybe I remember it more intensely because of what happened afterward. But I cannot completely explain it away. The experience stayed with me as I got older. For years, I would not sleep with my bedroom door open. I hated dark hallways. I hated waking up at night and seeing a doorway across the room. I would always look toward it first, even when I knew there was nothing there. And sometimes, I felt like the figure had not stayed behind at my grandparents' house. When I moved to a different state later in life, I thought that would make the feeling go away. I thought a new place would erase it. A new room, new walls, new hallways, no purple carpet, no lavender wallpaper, no huge window beside the bed. But sometimes I still felt it. I would wake up in the middle of the night and feel like something was in the room. I would see a dark shape in the corner of my eye. I would look toward a doorway and feel that same cold, heavy dread settle in my chest. I cannot say for certain that it was the same thing. Maybe it was only the memory following me. Maybe once you see something terrifying as a child, your mind learns to expect it everywhere. Maybe every dark doorway becomes connected to the first one. Maybe every shadow takes on the shape of the thing you were most afraid of. That is probably the logical answer. But it does not always feel logical in the moment. I am 16 now, and people still do not really believe me. They say I was too young to remember clearly. They say I had a nightmare. They say it was sleep paralysis. They say old houses make noises and shadows can look like anything at night. Maybe they are right. Maybe there is an explanation for every part of it. But I know that when I was 6 or 7, I woke up in my mom's old purple room and saw a puppet show outside the window. Then I turned around and saw a figure in the doorway, and every time I blinked, it came closer. That memory has never left me. About 15 years ago, my wife and I separated. At the time, our 2 youngest children were only 2 and 4 years old. They were too young to understand the reasons adults separate, too young to grasp the difference between a parent leaving a marriage and a parent leaving them. All they knew was that their mother was suddenly no longer living in the house with them. She moved in with her own mother, their Nana. The children stayed with me. That period was difficult for everyone, but it was especially hard on the 2 youngest. They shared a room, and after their mother left, neither of them wanted to sleep alone. They had already shared the room before the separation, but suddenly it became something different. They needed each other there. They needed the sound of another person breathing in the dark. They needed to know someone else was close. Their behavior changed. There were more tears than usual, more arguments, more clinginess, more nighttime complaints. They would wake up crying, saying they missed their mother or asking when she was coming home. Some nights, one would have a bad dream and wake the other. Then both of them would end up upset, and I would be trying to calm two small children while exhausted myself. I was doing my best, but I was learning as I went. There is no manual for explaining heartbreak to a 2-year-old or a 4-year-old. You can tell them that their mom loves them. You can tell them she is safe. You can tell them they will see her again. You can tell them that none of it is their fault. But there is only so much those words can do when they are small enough that the world feels simple. In their minds, Mom had been there, and then she was not. The details did not matter. The absence did. The separation had also created tension between me and my wife's side of the family. Their mom and Nana would sometimes show up without much warning to spend time with the children. At least, that was how it was presented. They wanted to visit, check on the kids, and make sure they were okay. But the visits often felt more complicated than that. Sometimes they would come over at inconvenient times. Sometimes they would show up already angry about something. Sometimes the conversation would turn into criticism about the way I was handling the children, the house, the routines, bedtime, meals, discipline, or anything else that could be used to suggest I was not doing enough. It was exhausting. I understood that everyone was hurting. I knew their mom and Nana loved the children. I knew they probably had their own fears and anger about the separation. But I was the one trying to keep a household together. I was the one getting the children ready in the morning, putting them to bed at night, making meals, dealing with tantrums, managing work, and trying to keep things stable for two little kids who were scared and confused. So when they appeared unexpectedly, I did not always feel grateful. I often felt like I was preparing for an argument. There were days when Nana would arrive, spend a little time with the kids, and then find some reason to pull me aside. She might ask why the children looked tired, why they were wearing certain clothes, why there were dishes in the sink, why one of them had said they missed their mum. The smallest things could become proof that I was somehow failing them. At the time, I was angry about it. I did not think she understood how hard I was trying. I did not think anyone did. That was the situation we were living in when the strange thing happened. It was early in the morning, around 4 or 5 o'clock. The house was dark and quiet. I had been asleep when I heard my bedroom door open. At first, I assumed one of the children had had another nightmare. That was common by then. One of them would wake crying, wander into my room, and need reassurance. Sometimes I could get them back to bed quickly. Other nights, they would be too upset to settle, and I would let them curl up beside me until morning. But this time, both of them came into the room together. They were crying, not screaming, not frantic, but frightened and upset in a way that made me sit up immediately. The older one was leading the younger one by the hand. They were both standing near my bed, their faces wet with tears. I asked them what was wrong. They told me Nana had visited them. At first, I did not understand what they meant. I assumed they had dreamed about her. Children dream about people they miss. They mix dreams with reality. They wake up convinced someone was in the room or that something happened, and by morning, the details are gone. I had already seen how much the separation had affected them. I knew their sleep had become unsettled. But they insisted. They said Nana had come into their room. They said she talked to them. I asked what she said. They tried to explain, each in their own small child way. The details were vague. One said Nana had been in their bedroom. The other said she had come to see them. They were upset, but not in the way they were after a nightmare about monsters or shadows. They sounded confused, like they had woken up and found someone there whom they knew well. I kept asking questions, trying to work out whether one had dreamed it and the other had been pulled into the story. They were both young enough that it was possible. A frightened child can say something, and the other child can accept it immediately. They can build a whole memory together in minutes. But in that moment, I was not thinking about anything supernatural. I was furious. I thought Nana had actually come over. I thought she had somehow entered the house in the middle of the night to see the kids. Maybe she had used a key. Maybe their mum had brought her. Maybe they had been standing outside talking, and one of the children had woken up. The idea of someone coming into the house at 4 in the morning without telling me made my blood boil. Showing up unexpectedly during the day was one thing. I already hated it, but at least it happened when people were awake. Turning up at 4 or 5 in the morning was something else entirely. I was tired, angry, and already under pressure. I thought they had crossed the line. I got the children calmed down as best I could. I told them they were safe. I told them to come into my bed. I tucked them in on either side of me, trying to get them to stop crying. Eventually, they settled. The older one stopped asking questions. The younger one pressed close against me and finally went quiet. Once I was sure they were asleep again, I got out of bed and picked up the phone. I called their mother. I did not care what time it was. I was furious enough that I did not stop to think about whether I should wait until morning. I wanted to know if she had been there. I wanted to know whether she had brought Nana over. I wanted to know how they had gotten inside. I wanted to make it clear that this was not acceptable. The phone rang. For a moment, I expected it to go to voicemail. Then, she answered. She was crying. Not angry, not defensive, not annoyed that I had called her in the middle of the night. She sounded devastated. I remember my anger stopping so suddenly that I did not know what to say. Before I could accuse her of anything, she said, "I can't talk right now. Mom died in her sleep last night." Then she hung up. I stood there in the dark with the phone in my hand. I do not know how long I stayed that way. My mind could not connect the sentence I had just heard with the children sleeping in my bed. Nana had died. She had died in her sleep that night. And a short time earlier, the 2 youngest children had come into my room crying because they said Nana had visited them and talked to them. I remember looking back at the bed. They were asleep. They looked so small. For a while, I did not know what I was supposed to do. Part of me still wanted a normal explanation. Maybe they had dreamed about her because they had seen her recently. Maybe they had heard someone mention her earlier that day. Maybe they were anxious about the separation and imagined that she had come to them. But the timing felt wrong. They had not just mentioned Nana casually. They had come into my room in the middle of the night, upset and insistent, saying she had been there. Then I called their mother, convinced I was about to have an argument about an inappropriate visit. Instead, I found out that Nana had died around the same time. I sat with that for a long time. The anger I had felt only minutes before was gone. All I could feel was cold. Not a physical cold, exactly. More like the feeling you get when something happens that you cannot put into the normal shape of your life. Your mind keeps looking for a place to set it down, but there is nowhere for it to go. I had never been especially interested in ghost stories. I was not someone who went looking for supernatural explanations. I had enough ordinary problems at the time. I was focused on my children, my marriage ending, work, money, sleep, and trying to make it through one day at a time. But that morning, there was no easy answer. The children had said Nana came to see them. Their mother said Nana had died in her sleep. And I was the only adult who heard the children say it before I knew she was gone. Eventually, I went back to bed. I lay down beside them and pulled them closer. They were still asleep, one on either side of me. I remember looking at them and thinking about how much they had been through already. They were too young to understand that their grandmother had died. They were too young to understand death in the full way adults understand it. They had already lost the daily presence of their mother, and now Nana was gone too. I did not want to wake them up. I did not know what I would even say. So I stayed there, holding them until morning. The next days were difficult in ways I do not remember clearly now. There were arrangements to make. There was grief. There were conversations with family. There was the confusing work of explaining loss to children who were not old enough to understand why a person could be there one day and never come back the next. But I never forgot that early morning. I never forgot how angry I was before I made the call. I never forgot how certain I was that Nana had shown up uninvited. And I never forgot the sound of their mother's voice when she answered the phone. Over the years, the children grew up. Like most children, they eventually forgot things that once seemed huge. The details of that night disappeared from their memories. They did not carry the same clear memory of Nana visiting their room. Maybe they remembered being upset. Maybe they remembered sleeping in my bed that night. Maybe they remembered pieces of the separation or the family tension. But they did not remember the visit. They did not remember saying she had been there. And now they have their own ways of seeing the world. One of them became an atheist. Not casually either. They have no interest in supernatural ideas at all. They do not believe in ghosts, spirits, life after death, or anything that cannot be explained through ordinary reality. They will not even watch television shows where supernatural events are presented as real. They dislike the entire subject enough that they avoid it. The other one grew into a nihilist. They are more open to the possibility that strange things might exist. But they do not believe ghosts are real. Their view is that death ends everything. Once we die, we simply disappear. There is no spirit left behind, no one returning, no lingering presence. I do not argue with them. They are adults now. They have the right to believe what they believe. And maybe they are right. Maybe they did dream about their Nana. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe they had heard something in the house, woke up scared, and their young minds reached for the person they missed or expected to see. Maybe I filled in the strange parts afterward because I learned she had died and could not stop connecting the events. Memory is not perfect. Grief can make people search for meaning. Children can say things that sound more significant than they are. I understand all of that. But I was there. I heard them come into my room. I heard both of them say Nana had visited. I heard them say she talked to them. And I called their mother because I believed Nana had actually come into the house before dawn. Then I learned she had died in her sleep. No one else was there. No one else heard it happen. No one else remembers the conversation the way I do. Even the two children who said Nana had come to see them have forgotten. That is probably the loneliest part of the story. Something can happen in front of you. Something that changes how you understand a person or a moment, and then time moves on. Everyone else forgets. Everyone else explains it away. Everyone else builds a life where that moment does not fit anymore. But you remember. You remember the time on the clock. You remember the sound of little feet in the hallway. You remember two frightened children standing beside your bed. You remember being angry enough to make a phone call in the middle of the night. And you remember the answer. I can't talk right now. Mom died in her sleep last night. I do not know what visited them that morning. I do not know whether it was really Nana. I do not know whether children can sense things adults cannot, or whether grief creates stories before anyone even knows there is grief to come. But I know that after I got off the phone, I went back to bed and held my children close. And for the rest of the night, I did not feel alone in the house. My call sheet did not say which of the several buildings I was supposed to go to, so I ended up trying doors on every building I could find until one finally opened. It was one of those jobs where you are given an address, a delivery time, and almost no useful information beyond that. The place was spread out over several old buildings, all sitting on the same large piece of property. From the road, it looked like a campus of some kind, but not the kind with clean sidewalks, modern glass doors, and clear signs telling you where to go. It looked old, not historic in a charming way either, just old in a way that made it feel like every building had been repaired badly and slowly over the years. I had been driving around the property for a few minutes already, looking for a main entrance or a loading area. There were several buildings close together, but they all looked slightly different. Some had newer siding or painted brick. Some had windows that looked recently replaced. Others looked like they had been standing there for 100 years and had simply been left to decay around the edges. My call sheet had a building number, but it did not tell me which entrance to use, what side of the property I was supposed to be on, or where the person receiving the order would be waiting. I parked my truck and started walking from one building to the next, checking doors and hoping I would find someone who could point me in the right direction. The first door was locked. The second door was locked too. The third one had a little paper sign taped to the window that said something about deliveries, but no one answered when I knocked. I tried the handle anyway. Locked, by that point, I was getting irritated. It was summer, the sun was out, and I had other stops to make that day. I did not want to spend an hour wandering around an old property because someone could not write a proper delivery instruction. Then I came to one building that looked worse than the rest. It was not even close. The others had at least looked like someone worked in them. This one looked neglected. A few bricks were missing near the bottom corner of the outside wall. The paint around the door frame was peeling. The windows looked darker than the windows in the other buildings, even though the sun was still high in the sky. There was something about it that made it feel colder before I even stepped inside. I remember standing at that door with my hand on the handle and thinking, great, of course this is the one that opens. Because it did open. The door gave way with a heavy, dragging sound, like it had not been used much recently. It took a little force to push it in, and when it finally opened, I was hit by that stale building smell. Old dust, old floor wax, maybe mildew somewhere deep in the walls. It was not strong enough to make me cough, but it was the kind of smell that made you feel like you had stepped into a place that had been closed for too long. The hallway inside was empty. I stood just inside the door for a second, waiting to hear voices or footsteps. Nothing. No music. No phones ringing. No office chatter. No sounds of people working. Just the faint hum of something electrical far away. The hallway stretched ahead of me under old ceiling lights. A few of the lights were on, but not all of them. Some of the bulbs looked yellow and weak. The walls were a dull color that might have once been white, but now looked grayish and stained in places. The floor had that hard, shiny look that old institutional buildings always have, like it had been waxed too many times over the years. I had seen enough horror movies in my life to know that walking down an empty hallway in a place like that was never a good idea. For some reason, my brain immediately pictured Linda Hamilton in Terminator, except I was not tough, armed, or prepared for anything. I was just a woman, carrying paperwork and trying to deliver a massive soda order to somebody's break room. I remember thinking that if someone suddenly stepped out from one of those dark doorways and tried to stab me, I would not even be surprised. That sounds dramatic now, but the building had that kind of feeling. It was not just old. It was wrong, somehow. Outside, it had been a bright summer day. The sky was clear. Everything had been hot and sunny. But as soon as I walked through that door, it felt like the day had changed. The building seemed darker than it should have been. The air felt cooler. Even the silence felt heavier. Still, I had work to do. I walked down the hallway, calling out a few times. Hello? Delivery? Nothing. I kept walking. There were doors on both sides of the hall, most of them closed. Some had faded labels near the handles, but I could not read half of them. The labels looked old and worn, as if they had been there for years. I passed one room where the door was partly open, but the inside was dark. I could see old furniture stacked against one wall. Another door had a small rectangular window, but the glass was cloudy and dirty. I started wondering whether I had gone into the wrong building after all. Then, finally, I heard a voice somewhere farther down the hall. I followed it and found a woman standing near what looked like a small office or storage room. She seemed completely normal. She was dressed casually, holding some papers, and looked mildly confused when she saw me. I explained that I had a delivery and that my call sheet had not made it clear where I was supposed to go. She nodded like this kind of thing happened all the time. She told me she had been expecting the order and pointed me toward a break room down another hallway. I was relieved to see another person. The building still made me uneasy, but at least I was not alone anymore. I went back outside, brought in the cases of drinks, and helped get the whole order into their break room. It was a huge order, too. The kind of order people jokingly call liquid diabetes because it was mostly soda, sweet tea, energy drinks, and other things nobody needs in the amount they buy them. I had to make several trips back and forth from the truck. By the time everything was stacked in the break room, I had been there for almost an hour. And by then, I really had to pee. I tried to ignore it at first. I figured I would just leave and find a gas station or something on the road. But I still had paperwork to finish, and I had already been holding it for longer than I wanted to admit. The break room was occupied by a few people now, and I did not want to make a big deal out of it, but eventually I asked the woman from earlier if there was a restroom I could use. She pointed down the hall. Just go straight down there, she said. It's at the end. That was it. No warning. No, it's kind of creepy down there. No, it's an old part of the building. Nothing, I thanked her and headed down the hallway she had pointed to. At first, it looked like the rest of the building. Same old floors, same faded walls, same dull lights overhead. But as I got farther away from the break room, the building changed. There was one point where the floor suddenly shifted from the shiny tile I had been walking on to another kind of tile that looked much older. The wall color changed, too. It was almost like crossing from one building into another without ever stepping outside. You know how old buildings sometimes have additions built onto them years later? The newer section will have different floors, different lights, newer doors, and cleaner walls. Then you walk through one doorway and suddenly everything changes. The ceiling gets lower, the hall gets narrower, the walls get colder, and you can tell you are in the original part of the building. That was exactly what it felt like. The newer side had been ugly, but it at least felt like people still used it. The older side felt abandoned. Not completely abandoned because the lights were on, but abandoned in the way a place can be when people only use it because they have to. The hallway was darker there. The overhead lights were farther apart, and the spaces between them seemed deeper than they should have been. The air felt colder, too. Not freezing cold, but noticeably colder than the break room had been only a minute before. I could feel it on my arms. I remember thinking, nope, this is where people get murdered in movies. But I really had to pee. And as a woman who worked in a male-dominated industry, I had used plenty of bathrooms that were uncomfortable, dirty, or not meant for me. I had used gas station bathrooms that should have been condemned. I had used bathrooms in warehouses with broken locks. I had used porta potties in the middle of summer. I had peed behind trucks, behind buildings, and in places where I would rather not have had to go. So an old, creepy bathroom at the end of a hallway was not going to stop me. At least, that is what I told myself. The restroom door was at the end of the hall. It looked old, like everything else in that part of the building. The paint had been worn down around the handle. There was no sign on the door that clearly said women or men, just a faded symbol that could have meant anything. I pushed it open. The room inside was dark. There was no window, so the only light came from the hallway behind me. I reached around on the wall, found the switch, and turned it on. The light flickered once before it stayed on. The room was small. It was a one-toilet bathroom, not a public restroom with stalls. There was one toilet, one small sink, and old dirty tile everywhere. The walls were tiled from halfway up to the ceiling, and the floor was tiled too. The tile was the kind you see in old schools, hospitals, or government buildings. It had once probably been white, but now it looked yellowed and gray around the edges. The whole room felt colder than the hallway. I stepped inside anyway and locked the door behind me. The lock was one of those old deadbolts that made a heavy metal sound when you turned it. I remember thinking that the door did not look like it would stop anybody if they really wanted to get in, but locking it still made me feel a little better. I turned around and finally looked at the whole room. That was when I realized it was not just a bathroom. It was a combination toilet and shower room. The shower was built into the wall directly in front of the toilet. It was recessed into the tile, like a shallow open stall without a curtain. There were no modern fixtures, no shiny faucet handles, no clean shower head. It all looked old, very old. At first, I only noticed the shower because it seemed strange. Then I noticed what was attached to the wall inside it. Chains, not decorative chains, not pipes, not broken plumbing. Chains, there were old metal chains bolted directly into the wall, heavy ones, and attached to them were what looked like old restraints, manacles meant to go around someone's wrists or ankles. I just stared at them. For a second, my brain refused to understand what I was looking at. I thought maybe they were for maintenance equipment, maybe some kind of old safety system. Maybe the building had once used the room for something else, and no one had bothered to remove them. But no matter how I tried to explain them, the truth was obvious. Those chains had been there to restrain people. The room felt different after that. I was sitting on the toilet, doing what I had come in there to do, but I could not take my eyes off those chains. The entire bathroom suddenly felt like it had shrunk around me. The tile seemed darker. The corners seemed deeper. The air felt stale and cold. I started thinking about what that room must have been used for. I had not known much about the place before I arrived, but it was clearly an old institutional building, the kind of place that had probably been used for things people did not like to talk about anymore. I thought about old hospitals, old psychiatric facilities, old methods of handling patients that would never be allowed now. The chains hung there on the wall, rusted and still. At least, they were still at first. Then they moved. I did not hear them before I saw them. I was staring right at them when one of the chains began to sway slowly from side to side. At first, I thought I had imagined it. I blinked hard. The chain moved again. Then the other one started moving too, back and forth, back and forth. Not much at first, just enough to make the metal shift and scrape against the tile wall behind it. I froze. There was no window in the room, no breeze, no fan blowing, no air vent near the shower that I could see. The door was locked behind me. I was the only person in there. But the chains were swaying. Then they started clanging. It was not loud at first, but in that little tiled room, every sound seemed huge. The metal links knocked against each other, then against the wall. The restraints at the end of the chains tapped against the tile. Clink, clink, clang. I have never moved that fast in my life. I do not even remember standing up. 1 second, I was sitting there staring at the chains, and the next I was on my feet trying to pull my pants up while my body was still in the middle of doing what bodies do when you panic. I cut that stream off so fast I probably broke some kind of personal record. Forget fear. Forget dignity. Forget everything. My only thought was to get out. The chains kept swinging. I grabbed at my clothes, got them up as fast as I could, and turned toward the door. The old deadbolt suddenly felt impossible to use. My hands were shaking, and the lock was rusty. I twisted it once. Nothing behind me, the chains clanged again. I twisted the lock harder. For one horrible second, I thought it was stuck. I could hear the chains moving behind me. I did not turn around. I refused to turn around. Every part of me wanted to look, but I knew if I looked and saw something standing in that shower, I would lose my mind. So I kept working at the lock. The deadbolt finally gave way. I yanked the door open so hard it hit the wall and made a loud bang. Then I ran. I ran down that old hallway without looking back. I did not care if someone saw me. I did not care if I looked crazy. I did not care if I had forgotten something in the bathroom. I just wanted to get away from that room. The hallway seemed longer than it had before. The lights overhead blurred as I ran past them. I could hear my shoes pounding against the old tile floor. I could hear myself breathing too loudly. For a few seconds, I kept expecting to hear footsteps behind me. I did not. But I did not slow down. I crossed back into the newer part of the building, where the floor changed and the walls became lighter again. I saw the break room in the distance, saw people moving around, heard normal voices, and felt some part of my brain begin to come back online. I made it outside to my truck. I got in, locked the doors, and sat there shaking. I was so close to crying, not because I had been physically hurt. Nothing had touched me. Nothing had chased me down the hall. But I had been scared in a way that reached deep into my body. The kind of scared where you cannot convince yourself you are okay, even after you are sitting in your truck with the doors locked and the engine running. I kept looking toward the building. From outside, it looked even worse than before. The broken bricks, the dark windows, the old entrance. The sun was still shining, but it did not make the building look less wrong. I had grown up in a house where weird things happened. I was not a stranger to strange noises, cold spots, footsteps in empty rooms, or that heavy feeling you get when you know you are not alone, even though nobody is there. But that bathroom scared me worse than almost anything I had experienced before. Maybe it was because of the chains. Maybe it was because I knew what they had probably been used for. Maybe it was because the room was so small, so dark, and so far from everyone else. Or maybe it was because those chains started moving when there was no possible reason for them to move. Whatever it was, I never forgot it. I have been in plenty of old buildings since then. I have walked through old hospitals, warehouses, abandoned-looking offices, and run-down industrial places. I have had to use weird bathrooms before and after that day. But I will tell you one thing. If I ever get sent to another decommissioned mental hospital, I am not going inside unless someone walks me exactly where I need to go. And I am absolutely not using the bathroom. Look, if you're still watching, you already know what this channel is. No jump scares, no fake drama, just real stories about real people who survive things most of us can't even imagine. And that's scarier than any movie could ever be. If you want more of this raw, unfiltered truth, told the way it deserves to be told, subscribe to Lacuna Noir. We're not here to waste your time. We're here to tell the stories that actually matter. Thanks for listening. Now go get some sleep, if you can.